There we go. Welcome everyone. My name is Grant Kastner. I am Extempore's community manager, and welcome to this Saturday morning webinar with us, Extempore, and our great friend, Dr. Florencia Henshaw, on unpacking comprehension-based activities on Extempore. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and I will hand it off to Florencia.
Okay, hello everybody. How's everyone doing? Saturday morning, we're here to learn. It's a very engaged and dedicated crowd. I'm so happy you're here. Keep saying hello, introduce yourself in the chat. It's all good. If you've ever been to one of my webinars, I like it when it's a cooperative learning experience. So feel free to share your own ideas, alternatives to things that I'm discussing in the chat while I'm talking. I believe we're going to do a traditional webinar format. So I'm going to be talking and presenting, and then Grant is here to answer questions and show you a little bit about Extempore. And then we are happy to take questions as well. So the title of today's webinar is Unpacking Comprehension-Based Activities on Extempore. And yes, I'm going to be talking a lot about Extempore, but let's talk a little bit about comprehension-based activities. If you are familiar with ACTFL, you probably know about the 3 modes of communication, singular, that are part of the World Readiness Standards for learning languages. Oh, I need more coffee this morning. And we are going to be focusing on one mode in particular, which is the interpretive communication mode. Now, you may have noticed that my title says comprehension, but ACTFL calls it interpretive communication. Is it the same thing or is it not the same thing? Well, the definition of interpretive communication is that learners understand, interpret, analyze what is heard, read, or viewed on a variety of topics. So comprehension is clearly a very important part of interpretive communication. So to me, they're one and the same. Why? Because comprehension involves interpretation of meaning, interpretation of the language. Without comprehension, it would be hard to have interpretive communication. You can interpret things without language, but when it comes to interpretive communication, we're talking about language being involved somehow. To put it another way, yes, it's about understanding messages. And I don't mean just simply and literally understanding the words. That is one layer of it, but clearly there's much more to it, right? Comprehension involves all sorts of factors. It's not just literally understanding words. What you'll see in many of the activities that I'll present today is that it is not just exposure, it is not just repeating, or it's not just reading aloud. Those types of activities do not involve understanding messages, understanding language, and so they would not count as comprehension-based activities. And we can argue whether those count as input. I would say no, because to me, input involves meaning, has to involve meaning. And why is it so important? Because the more we push students to understand language, the more we are facilitating acquisition. As we all know, input and comprehensible input, understanding language is necessary for acquisition. This is why in our own book, Maris and I say that without interpretive proficiency, there is no proficiency in the target language. So out of the 3 modes, we really do need to dedicate a lot of time to interpretive communication. I understand how much more fun it is to do presentational, how fun it is to do interpersonal, and the students are talking or writing, creating. I get all that, and I'm a big fan of all that. But we need to spend time on interpretive proficiency if we want them to develop proficiency in the language. Let's talk a little bit about text. And text, the word text, most people associate it with something written, but as you saw in the definition of interpretive communication, is not limited to written. Text can be written, oral, or visual. Now, there's a little bit of a debate here. I'm going to be very, very short and brief about it in terms of whether these texts need to be authentic or not. So ACTFL does push for authentic resources, authentic materials. That would mean texts that were not created for the purposes of language learning. So they're not created for learners. Is there a place for texts that are created for learners? Yes. If you ask me, I'll say yes. Even within authentic resources, to me, there's a little bit of a continuum, and Matt Koss talks about this quite a bit, in the sense that some of them can be slightly modified, some of them can be very modified, or you can go to the extreme of completely unmodified. As you found them, you use them in class. Created for learners, I think, also involves a little bit of a continuum, because some of the resources created for learners, the language has been manipulated so much that it starts to resemble a bit of an artificial use of language, right, with a lot of repetition. But you might have a little bit of a middle ground where it is modified, but not simplified to the extreme that it is so repetitive. The examples that I'll give, some of them include authentic resources and some of them is language created for the learner. So that's why I wanted to at least clarify that here. And I'll also give you my very abridged take on authenticity, which is a topic that I find fascinating. So my take on authenticity is that there's nothing wrong with modifying the language to convey genuine content. So when we talk to an audience, when we write something for an audience, we adapt how we convey that message to target our audience so that our audience can understand it and engage with it. And so that, to me, is part of authentic language use. Also, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? So you don't have to go with 100% unmodified, and you don't have to go with 100% artificially sounding language, right? It is not all or nothing. I think that there's a lot of middle ground, and I think that there is room for both. Purpose matters a lot. So when we're talking about input for the purpose of developing the linguistic system, for developing acquisition, fostering acquisition, then yes, you do have to keep in mind how much the learners are going to be able to understand. Some authentic resources, I think, I understand that they can be simplified in the sense of what you ask them, the learners, to do, right? So the resource is not modified, but the question is really, really simple. But then here comes the big dilemma. Is that worth it, right? Because the learners are not getting a lot of language out of it. And if you need to spend a lot of time scaffolding so the learners understand, are we really maximizing language development? Now, I think that there's a lot of other purposes, may not be language development, a lot of other purposes why we want to have authentic resources. And I'll give you a very, very simple example, a personal example. So I am learning Italian just for fun. And to me, it is so gratifying when I am, browsing Facebook or Twitter and I see a meme or something funny in Italian, which is completely authentic. It's not meant for language learners, right? It's something that, Italians are sharing on social media. It's so gratifying to get humor in another language and to be part, even a tiny little part of that community of speakers, because I understood that and I can indicate, haha, I understood that too. So there's other purposes for having authentic resources, but I am also a big fan of modified, elaborated input. So we are helping the learners make the most out of the input for language development. Let's talk a little bit about comprehension questions, and let's discuss some questions related to comprehension questions. So the first one, which to me is key, and I ask my own TAs and my own student teachers all the time, Could they answer without understanding? You'd be surprised how many comprehension questions that I see on textbooks or materials. You could probably answer them, perhaps partially, without actually understanding language. So this is something that I ask myself whenever I create comprehension questions. Could they answer without understanding? Sometimes it can be something as simple as they're just repeating what they saw, but they're not actually understanding. Sometimes it's because the question can be answered based on graphics, based on movement, if it's a short film, for example, but not based on whether they understood language. So that's something that I ask myself too. Of course, the big question related to comprehension questions is in what language? What is the language of the questions? What is the language of the answers? And again, here, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, and it's going to depend a lot on your learners and on your purpose. So if your purpose is assessment of listening, assessment of reading, and you don't want to introduce that extra factor of whether they understood the question or whether they have the language to express that in the target language, then yes, the questions and the answers should be in what I call the shared language other than the target language. That would be another language that you and your learners share and that you both feel comfortable using. Now, I think that there is value for comprehension questions in the target language as well, if the purpose is to give them that extra input, right? When you're asking something in the target language and the learners have to understand it so they can give you an answer, that question itself is input. So there is also a place for questions in the target language. The answers, I don't mind when the students mix languages, so I'm okay if it's partly in the target language, partly in the shared language, but it's going to depend on what is it exactly that you're asking them to answer. A question like why for novice learners can sometimes be very intimidating and difficult, and so in that case, I let them answer in the shared language. Another question, which may sound silly, but it's important to reflect on it, is what are you asking, right? So what would be the answer that you would consider then to have been successful comprehension? I think that we need to think about that too. And sometimes what you're asking may be confusing, right, for the learners, right? They may misinterpret your question. And so it's not an issue of misunderstanding the text, but it is an issue of misunderstanding the question. We need to keep that in mind as well. And then the other big question is, why not just translate, right? So if we're trying to make sure they understood, when you give them a text, they say, what did I say? What did I just write? Translate it. Why not? Well, I understand if you're thinking, well, that would be the best way to make sure that they understood, but I prefer to avoid conveying the sense that understanding a language is simply translating it into another language. Translation to me is a little bit more limiting in that you're just translating exactly what that person said. And as we saw before, there's much more to comprehension. And I think that there are different ways to demonstrate comprehension, and variety is wonderful. On top of that, I think that it's going to make the learners perhaps be extra careful about every single element of the language. So instead of sometimes getting the gist of it, they're going to be so concerned about wanting to translate it exactly. And translation is pretty difficult. Translation is a difficult skill. So that's why I think it's okay every now and then, if you want to use it to make sure they understood, I get it. That's okay, but not as the main way to assess comprehension. I personally like it. My comprehension activities would go from understanding the lines and that I think I would say is translation, to reading between the lines, which is more like inferencing, and then creating beyond the lines. So now that I know this information, how can I transform it or use it as a jumping point for another discussion, for creating something, maybe connecting it to one of the other modes? To me, that's where the magic happens. And I like variety and how the students demonstrate comprehension. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Extempore. The tagline, I don't know if it's still the tagline, but it used to be, is the speaking practice app. So if it's speaking practice, why are we all here talking about comprehension questions? It's true that Extempore is best known for speaking assignments, and it is indeed wonderful for speaking assignments, and I use it for that a lot. And the reason for that is because the students can read, listen, or watch a prompt or a question, and then they respond on the spot. If you're familiar with like the AP exam, works very, very similar to that, or even Apple, the OPIC, right? All of those exams. The video recording, which is one way that you can capture the students responding, can be set to start as soon as they see or hear the question. That's how I use it the most. And that's because I don't want rehearsed answers. I want them to show me what they can do on their own. And so I limit it to 1 second to review, which is the minimum required. And then I personally don't limit the time to respond. So the students are not seeing a countdown and then getting nervous about, oh my God, I'm running out of time, I'm running out of time. So I put it as unlimited. Most students really don't record for more than 2-3 minutes, if that. And in terms of allowed to re-record, I set it as no. And again, it's because I don't want them to keep trying and trying and trying until it's perfect. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for them to communicate to the best of their abilities. Grant will talk a lot more and can talk a lot more about Extempore than I can, but I do want to clarify real quick that they do have a free account. Everybody thinks that Extempore is a very expensive thing, but they do have a free unlimited account. And then you can try it without creating an account at, on their website, extemporeapp.com. If you click on that purple bluish button that says try me, you can try it there. Why do I like Extempore? So it has both practical and pedagogical advantages. Among the practical advantages is that, to me, it minimizes cheating or these rehearsed answers. If you've used Flipgrid or any kind of, post a video on this forum, what we would get, this is my experience, I don't know if it's been your experience, but my experience is a lot of rehearsed answers. Sometimes they're reading and you can tell that they're reading, and sometimes it's memorized. So they spend time memorizing what Google Translate told them to say, and then they're trying to repeat it. But that doesn't tell me what they can do. I'm interested in what the students can do, not what Google can do. And it's also really, really easy to use. It's easy to grade, enter a grade, give feedback. You can do audio feedback, you can do video feedback, you can just do written feedback. So it's very, very easy in that regard. And also, I'm the only one who sees the answers, at least that's how I use it. And I like that, so that I can give feedback to the student, and the student is answering, but not for everybody to see and comment. In terms of pedagogical advantages, which to me are also important, I like that it pushes students to express themselves to the best of their abilities. And sometimes that might include circumlocution. Is there value in them, preparing, trying again, task repetition? Yes, yes, yes. But what I see a lot in my own courses is that there's a lot of that and not a lot of this pushing yourself to try to the best of your abilities. And I think that there's value in that. I know I don't have data, but anecdotally, I can tell you in my courses, I can see their fluency go up so much in terms of how much they can say, within the first minute and by the end of the semester. And that's because they got so used to hearing the question once, go. Hear the question once, go, right? It's a little bit of a skill that needs to be developed too. And for asynchronous online courses, which we have a lot of, it's great to simulate interaction without having to set up appointments, you know, and meeting with them at a specific time. It's great that the students can do it at home on their own whenever they want, sometimes at 2 in the morning, and then they can complete the assignments. But why for interpretive? Well, one advantage that I see is this individual results. So it's good to do whole class discussion and activities, groups. It's all great. I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong with that, but there's also value in individual engagement with a text or individual engagement with the language. So you're not relying on your classmate answering for you. You're not relying on just, you know, waiting for other people to answer, right? You hear the text, you need to answer. And Extempore also offers multiple choice activities. I'm not going to show you those, but you could certainly use it for that as well. I think that is especially useful for courses where comprehension activities are done at home, again, to minimize this relying on outside resources. And if you are going to use it for assessments where you don't want them to use outside resources, if you're a one-on-one school and everybody has their own laptop or tablet, you can use it as a computer-based assessment that way. And like I said, minimizes relying on outside help, and you can even control how many times they listen to a question, which sometimes can be hard to do with other tools. And in a way, if the questions are going to be in the target language, this is also good as ear training for interpersonal, right? They get used to listening to you in the target language. And so if you're going to be doing interpersonal later on in real time, then their ear is already accustomed to listening to you in the target language. Okay, so let's get into ideas, which is why you're all here probably. Okay, so the first idea that I have would be something like spot the differences, where the prompt can be a picture or can be audio recording, and then, no, picture plus, not or, I'm sorry, plus audio recording. And then their response, the student's response, is to say what's different. So you can use a map, you can use a schedule, you can use a painting, and all of these are authentic resources, by the way. And so, for example, in the case of the schedule, which you would post it, upload it as a picture in the prompt, but then you would also record audio describing the student's schedule. And you can make it as long or short as you think your learners are going to be able to handle it, of course. So you could say something like, this student has math class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? And that would be like different. I'm sorry, the difference would be that the student has math class on Monday and Tuesday, not Tuesday and Thursday, right? Or in the case of the picture, right? There are, I don't know, maybe there's a dog playing with a cat or something like that, and no, there's not, right? So you would describe the picture, and then the student would need to pay attention to what you're saying and then respond what was different between your description and the picture. Another example, similar, but a little bit more elaborate, if you will, would be correct the summary. So the prompt can be text or a video reading, which would also involve text. And then the response would be what parts are inaccurate. So this is a summary of a short film that the students had watched. So I'm questioning I'm asking about their comprehension of the short film, but also whether they're understanding this language. And it doesn't have to be a short film. Perhaps it could be an event, a news story that you discussed with them, especially at the intermediate levels and up. And in terms of a video reading, I have an example that I can share with you. Let me just share the link. and you can open it in your own browser. Let's see if I can do it. There we go. And I'll put it in the chat. No, it doesn't let me. Okay. I don't know why it's not letting me share it. All right, I'll try it later. How about that? I'll try it later. And then I'll see if I can share the link. But essentially the video reading is what we're doing right now, right? You're seeing the text and somebody talking or reading. That's all it is. So I would read this out loud, for example. I would say, Ana quería tener un gato, pero su novio quería tener un perro, right? Where they're also listening to you and reading at the same time. I think that it's a great way to give them bimodal input, both written and oral at the same time. And that can be part of the prompt, right? And they need to say what parts of that summary don't make sense for the short film that you all watched as a class. A simpler way of doing comprehension would be with pictures, right? So this is picture matching. So the prompt can be the picture and audio recording. So for example, you would describe a house, one of these houses, and then the students would say which one, for example, B3, and then maybe also tell you why. So they're not just guessing. But I would say give them maybe 6 or a few more, right? So something where it minimizes the chances of them just guessing correctly, but also they can tell you why. And what I like about doing these kinds of activities is when the pictures have some similarities, right? So as you can see in this little drawing, some of the houses are 1-story houses and some of the houses are 2-story houses, for example. So if I start my description with it's a 2-story house, you don't know right away which one is going to be. You need to keep listening. You need to keep processing to make sure that you know which one I'm talking about. I think those kinds of activities work better than when it's a very easy giveaway from the beginning. Similarly, you can do a map as a prompt and then also audio recording. And so you can give them instructions or directions. So you're here, turn this way, go 2 blocks, turn here, and then they tell you where they ended up. What I would suggest is, and this is important, careful with very complicated maps. Sometimes authentic maps from like tourist maps, they're too busy, right? There's just too much to process, too many details, too many new streets that they're not going to know, right? So in this case, I went with a very, very simple map of our own campus. So for the students, the names of the streets are not completely unknown. The buildings are not completely unknown. There's some point of reference there that they're understanding. You can create your own map or use a very simplified map. But I would say just be careful with these kinds of activities where the map is so complicated that they're just having, they're having trouble following you, not because they're not understanding, but because they're getting lost in the map. Another way that you could do reading comprehension would be to put events in chronological order. So the prompt can be just a written list of events with letters or numbers, whatever you prefer. And then the answer is simply A, D, C, B. And you can do it with or without a picture. So you can maybe put it with a little picture like this one to help them figure out this person's routine, right? Because sometimes events can be in different orders. You could have different possible answers. So you can give them a picture and then it's almost like they're doing matching, if you will. For maybe more advanced learners, but not necessarily, you can do an adapted decision-making activity where the prompt is a video presentation or perhaps written scenarios. And then the students have to choose one. So for example, I've done things like which course would you take? So if they listen to a presentation about 2 courses, describing 2 courses, which one they would prefer and why? Which project would you prefer? So if you had these 2 options, instead of the final exam, which option would you prefer? As an alternative, if for some reason your learners are not going to feel comfortable choosing one or making a decision, you can also have them simply state in their opinion what are pros and cons of each one. And if, in many cases, unless the learners are advanced, I think it's best to ask them to share, to answer in the shared language, because sometimes elaborating as to why they would like one course, why they would like one project, what could happen is two things. First, they might not have the language, the abilities to do it, and then they get almost like overwhelmed, right? You get this cognitive overload of trying to figure out what you're trying to say, and then at the same time remembering what was, described in the videos. It's just too much, right? Too much for them, and then it's unfair too that you're asking them to do so much. But also because, and this is what my students do, they just repeat. They repeat what they read. They repeat what they heard. And I'm not sure that they understood or they're just repeating. And so I think it's best in these cases to tell them to justify why in the shared language. And that way they're explaining to you the pros and cons or why they like one thing. And you can rest assured that they understood, right? That they're not just repeating. Another thing that you can do with authentic resources, such as a menu or a flyer, and yes, you can modify it if needed, is comparisons. And in at least I've found several, menus where they have different promotions, or in this case, different classes, swimming classes, right? And they have different plans, different options, or packages, and so you can ask them a question. So which one is the cheapest, or which one is the most expensive, which one lasts the longer, which one has more classes, right? Something like that. And so the students can then answer partly in the target language, maybe the why in the shared language. And it doesn't have to be a question. Perhaps it's like a true false, right? And so you can ask them something like, Plan 1 includes more classes than Plan 4. And then they have to say yes, no, why, potentially corrected if it's a false statement. Another thing that I think is fantastic to have as data, if you will, is to ask learners to engage in deducing from context live. So to kind of think aloud as they are engaging with the text. So the prompt can be a text like what you see here, not long, don't overwhelm them, and some phrases or words, depending on what is it that you're asking them to deduce, are underlined, bold, careful with colors, right? But underline should probably work well. And you ask them, what do you think each underlined word or phrase means? And the students can give you the translation. Sometimes you can select from choices if you need to scaffold it a little bit more, right? So do you think it means at the same time, however, right? You give them a few options and they have to tell you which one they think it probably is and why. Or give a synonym if they're advanced learners. Lower level students are probably not going to be able to give you a synonym. But I think this is a good way for you to see where each student is at, right? So how well they are able to deduce from context. And similarly, how much they're able to inference from text. And so you can give them a short written text. So the example that I have here just says, the professor gave me a note for my mother. I have read it. He says that he needs to talk to her because I'm not doing so well. So what can you deduce about this narrator. How old do you think the narrator is? How do you know how old the narrator is? And they can answer in the shared language, most likely, depending on the level. So if you work with heritage speakers, for example, it's quite possible that they can answer in the shared language or in the target language or a mix of both. For most students, I would prefer to hear the reasoning in the shared language. They can tell me, you know, their thought process or what things they're noticing from the text. And you can go to other places from here, right? You can have texts that are about maybe with different sensory images, right? So, and they can tell you which examples they find, or if you do more of a literary analysis, right? You can maybe then have them read a short text and then give you a little bit of their analysis of it. You can do visual analysis too. Like there's so much more that you can do from there. So those are all of the ideas that I have for you today. You can find me on Twitter a lot. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook. And that is my site, go.illinois.edu/TLTL, where I have a lot of tech tools and ideas. And I saw a lot of like little pop-up messages and I probably missed a lot.
No, it's Florencia, it's okay. There were quite a few questions about the about just extempore in general and a few of the things that you can do. If you wouldn't mind, Florencia, how does this sound? I'm going to show, I just want to show a few resources that we have and a couple of different types of speaking assessments so that people who might not be familiar with the platform can see a few examples. And then once I'm finished with that, I'd love to open the floor for questions that anybody might have about extempore or questions for you directly. How's that?
Okay. Yep.
Okay, cool. All right, so I just, this is going to stop your screen share. Okay, cool. I just wanted to show a few things about extempore to follow up to what Florencia was saying earlier about the interpretive assessments. And I just wanted to show an example of a output-based assessment if you weren't familiar of how the platform works. So here, this is what the student would see when the student goes to take their assessment. They could click in, and then on this assessment, Florencia mentioned the timers that we have. You can add a time to review, as you saw, and a time to respond as well. So the student would click it, and then it would be a lockable question. So as soon as they join, they would see the prompt. This one has an audio prompt. As Florencia mentioned, you can add audio prompts, you can add images. It has an audio prompt and an image. And the student, this is all in English just for the sake of you guys understanding, but the student, as soon as they click this, you'll see the time to review has not started, but as soon as they click the audio, then it will
hey, it's Michael. I'm free actually on Sunday afternoon, but Saturday night and Saturday morning I'm really busy, so maybe let's shoot for Sunday.
Right, so the audio plays, and then once the audio finishes playing, then you see the time to review kick in. The student can look at the prompt and say, okay, well, this is weather looks great. Maybe we can do something on Saturday. Oh, wait, he said he was busy then, right? So there's a lot of interpreting and mental processing that the student has to do. Once the timer then counts down, student will get a nice little 3, 2, 1, and they can start recording their response to the prompt within the time. I don't know, it looked really beautiful on Saturday. I think we should go to the park and sunbathe. So I stop recording. And that's my response. That is how the student would complete a basic question on extempore. So the student can click submit, and they can continue going through the questions of that assessment. Now, once they've submitted their assessment on the teacher side, the teacher can then come in and provide feedback to a student response. So they would see the response here, they would be able to listen to the response. And if you had a rubric, this is for an AP assessment, you could drag the slider and determine how many points you want to give them based on their response. And then you can provide feedback, text feedback, audio feedback, and video feedback for the students to see on their student portal once you have submitted their feedback. So that's just a very basic way of how the presentational mode would work, or responding with speaking, right? We are the speaking practice app. And there were also a couple of questions about interpersonal. I'm not going to show how an interpersonal assessment would work live. We have a lot of resources on that. But one of the things that I do want to show, we have, like I said, we have some questions on this. When an interpersonal response is submitted, so it's like a group feature, right? So 2 students or 4 students are speaking at the same time. Both videos are recorded, and then the instructor can leave unique feedback. So I can leave unique feedback to community manager, and I can leave unique feedback to Alex Sewane at the same time. Or not at the same time, but in the student's same in the same submission for both students under that assessment. Finally, I just want to show a few resources that we have related to the platform. We have a grab and go task page where we have a bunch of authentic tasks that you can use with your students. We have some new blogs that I wrote on reading assessments and interpretive comprehension, as Florencia talked about today. We also have a site on professional development, all the things that we offer, whether it's our PD sessions on YouTube or things like our upcoming summer PD. And then finally, our YouTube channel itself, where this webinar is going to be posted in very, very soon once we wrap up. You can see our past webinars, some product updates, little shorts that I do. And we also have a Bites page as well, where you can find we're really sort of trying to beef this channel up lately. We haven't gotten too much into it, but unique assessments and ways that, tricks and tips for you to use the platform in a much more digestible presentational manner. So thank you to Florencia. Thank you all for listening. Here we are. I'd love to open the floor for questions or anything that you guys had, whether it's related to Extempore. We have a whole bunch of comments, whole bunch of Q&A. I'm going to look at the Q&A and see what we have. Okay. Virginia, okay, yes, I'm going to answer these live. Virginia asked if there was a free version of Extempore. Yeah, I believe Florencia mentioned that in the beginning. Yes, there is a free version. It is a bit, there are a few things that you can't do compared to the paid version, but yes, there is a free version of Extempore, yeah. And then Liz, I want to answer this live too. Liz says, is Extempore accessible for students with disability? Is it screen reader friendly? I believe so, yes. I believe it is screen reader friendly. I can double check on that, but I believe it is accessible for students.
Liz, if I may chime in on that just a little bit. So we had to go through a rigorous process to get Extempore allowed to be used in our courses by a disability, by an accessibility expert. And he gave us the green light after requesting some modifications, which the Extempore team did very, very promptly, and I appreciate that. And what I would say is, if you're using a picture, though, you would need to think about, I don't think, I might be wrong, Grant, but I don't think that you can insert a description, an alternative text to pictures when you just upload the picture as a prompt.
Yeah, currently, I don't think you can.
Right. So what I would probably say is to do something like what I shared in terms of a video reading, where you create a video where you sort of read that, infographic to the student, or where you read the text to the student. That's what I do a lot of the times, because even sometimes some screen readers with Spanish don't always work well. So I think it's good for you to be giving them, for the other students too, right, to be getting the written and oral input at the same time, but also for accessibility, for a student to be able to hear you read that text to them. So that could be another thing to do, work around. Is that an expression in English?
Yes. I think Alejandro, yeah. Alejandro, that's a really good question. So Alejandro asked about time limits and time extensions. Funny you mentioned that. One of our most recent features is time extensions, right? So when you have, if say you want your time to review to be 60 seconds for a prompt and time to respond to be 30 seconds, you can go on, we have updates on this that we just posted on our YouTube channel. You can go to the class page, and then under the student, at the student roster level, you can set the time extension. And then you click the little setting cog, and then you adjust the time, and you can say this student has 1.5x time or 2x time, or however much time you want to give them.
I tried in my experience, right? So this was in my experience, and I appreciate now that there's some flexibility, but I've tried putting limits to answers, like how long they have to record. And for us, these are, novice, high, intermediate, low students at best. The time limits didn't work. We had way too many students running out of time and getting frustrated, or simply having anxiety looking at the countdown. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is not helping learning. And so for us to remove time limits was the best thing that could happen. it's just in case somebody's thinking, oh my God, but if somebody records like a 3-minute thing and I have to sit there listening to the student talk for 3 minutes. So actually you can put twice the speed so it goes faster when you are grading. So you listen to the student in faster speed. In my experience, again, these are not very advanced learners. They're not going to, record a 20-minute speech on your question. So I think that removing the time limit has not been a problem. Only one time, a student, he really wanted to tell me a lot of things. And so his answers were maybe like 5-6 minutes. But hey, he wanted to speak in Spanish. So I was like, sure, go for it. Tell me all about your life, So anyway, so I just wanted to say that. I know how tempting it might be to say, you have 1 minute, you have a minute and a half, because we did it thinking this is great to push them. And it backfire on us. So just think twice before setting time limits. That would be my advice.
I think the one tip that I would add in as well, Florencia, is that if you want to set time limits, I think what you say is fine. As long as you have the time to review limited and they only have one chance to respond, then you're still going to get that spontaneous response. But for things like the AP assessment, where there are strict timers, at least just practice multiple times beforehand, right? So that they can really get a feel for it and understand, okay, this is what it's like. Okay, I know how much time I have, as opposed to just saying, okay, here's your first extempore prompt. You have 30 seconds to review and 30 seconds to speak. Good luck. Right, it's an adjustment period, and there is a learning curve. We have a question from Wendy, who I am going to let speak.
Thank you. I don't know how many people on this call are new to Extempore, but I want to thank Florencia. It was really so many good suggestions. I have a question for you. So I come from a program where the emphasis on using the target language might be a little bit excessive, actually. And I'm wondering about whether your students ever get confused as to when they are expected to use the target language versus when it is okay to express themselves in the shared language, or if that's like anything else, just a matter of sort of doing it so often that they become accustomed to your routine.
Yeah,
that's one thing I want to say.
yes. No, and I completely understand. I think in the instructions, it needs to be super clear. And it depends a lot on the assessment and what I'm expecting. But I even try to explain my students why. As a student, I would want to know why. Sometimes I'm forced to answer in a language, right? So sometimes I do, and I tell them why we want them to push themselves to express in Spanish. And sometimes, it's more about, we want to understand your reasons behind this, so please, you can answer this part in English, right? Like, please answer in English or something like that. And we do say English because that is the only other shared language I have with my students. But of course, you can put other languages too if that's what you're comfortable with. But yeah, I don't think that students get confused necessarily, especially because I'm also lenient that if in one case they were supposed to answer in Spanish and one student got confused, I'm not going to take points off for that. But the presentational speaking task, yes, where we are simulating interpersonal, where I'm asking them a question in Spanish, they know that to answer in Spanish. So those assignments are separate, right? And so I have not had that issue of students getting confused with those.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I say one other thing about Extempore, which, Grant, I think the thing that I find just phenomenal about Extempore that you kind of hopped over is how you can insert audio feedback immediately after the student error, or you can respond to something they say. If they share something about their grandmother, you can say, oh, me too, I didn't know that, that's exciting. And then when they make an error, right after the error, you can correct the pronunciation or the grammar, or instead of sort of saving it to the end, And my students have told me that they find that so helpful. It is one of the distinguishing things for me about Extempore.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely, Wendy. We obviously I didn't have a bunch of time to go over all of the settings, but yeah, the inline feedback is super, super helpful for students because you can stop right, like you said, you can stop right where they're speaking and say, hey, make sure this is pronounced like this, or say they just uttered this really long paragraph and you stop and it's like, that was really impressive, right? Look at the progress that you've made from whatever they started to that point. Yeah, so the inline feedback is really helpful and the students really enjoy that. I can agree.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you. And then we have a question from Sonia de Vargas. I will allow her to talk.
I think that was, sorry, I think that was a mistake. I think I raised my hand by mistake. I apologize.
It's okay.
I think there's a question from Sandra.
I am
Okay.
I'm getting to that now. If there are no further questions, I will just have it as a friendly reminder, this webinar is being recorded. It will be on YouTube. Everyone always asks that. It will be within the next hour. I promise. Look at our YouTube channel. It will be there with all of the information and goodies that you need about what you saw today.
There was one question by Alejandro. I don't know if if I can go back and answer it.
Yeah, sure. Of course, Florencia. Yeah, absolutely.
So Alejandro asked, how do you deal, Florencia, if they read their answers, students providing the questions to peers? It's a good question. It hasn't happened too often, but I am suspecting that it's starting to happen. I know Extempore has a way of not revealing the question number so that the students don't know which question is going to be asked next. If they just said, for question 1, say this, for question 2, say that, right? If they're starting to share that. But I have to say, I mean, ideally at some point, and I know this is a feature we have requested for a while, and I'm sure they're working on it, is to have that bank of questions. And so it pulls randomly for each student. So the student doesn't know exactly which question they're going to get. Even then, yes, could there be some student out there who has answers to all of the questions and memorizes all of them and then is ready to go? Yes, but the likelihood of that, I think, would be pretty small. And I'll always share with you that one student who figured out a way of cheating with Extempore, and this is what it took. It took the student having earphones, having somebody in another room, a native speaker, who would tell them what to say. So he would read or repeat the questions out loud to the best of his ability. And sometimes he wouldn't, and then the answer would make no sense. Poor, the native speaker friend that was trying to help him. And I could tell that he was waiting for, to say something about whatever their friend would tell them to say. Like, I can't tell that somebody is repeating, So, but that's one of those things where it was just impossible for us to prove it. And sometimes you gotta, you have to let it go. There's always going to be one student out there who goes above and beyond the, trying to cheat, but it's just so far and few in between compared to what we were seeing on Flipgrid. That was just rehearse, reading. I mean, it was just, you can tell them until you're blue in the face, please do not read. And it was all reading. Yeah, if they put that much effort into the class, I mean, seriously. And so I was like, okay, challenge accepted. So then what I realized it wouldn't work was with the audio questions, because the poor guy has such a hard time repeating what I was asking. So audio questions, then he couldn't cheat as much. And then questions more related to the course, because the poor native speaker friend had no idea what had been discussed in the course. And so it just little things like that, where it was like, okay, let's see if you can do this. But at some point you have to let go. You're going to go, you can't be spending so much time trying to make it 100% cheating proof. That is impossible. Even with proctoring services, there's still issues, right? So I'd say just aim for minimizing issues. That was all I was trying to do, and Extempore has successfully helped with that, especially because I'm thinking of the students that, even if not many in the lower levels, but the students who really want to learn Spanish and improve their Spanish and their communication skills. And so if I can push those to be like, you can do it, express yourself to the best of your abilities, and they feel so good that they're able to do it. But if you just give them Flipgrid, many of them, even those that want to learn, they're still like, no, but let me write it first because I want to say it perfect. And then it's like, you got to get out of that. You got to get out of that, you know, trying to say it perfectly. And it does help them a lot.
Florencia, if I can add on to that, there are a couple of times before I started using Extempore, when I did use Flipgrid, and I said, oh, you know, here's the prompt, this is what you have to do. And the immediate response from 95% of them was, get out a piece of paper and start writing down what they're going to say. Right. It was just immediate for them. So yeah, and Extempore has really helped that. And the thing that I'll add on to respond to Alejandro's question is that one of the things when we get asked this question about cheating too, I'll always say you can only do so much, right, as a teacher. And with Extempore, we try to provide as many possible, you know, safeguards for academic integrity that we can, right? But at the end of the day, like you said, Florencia, there is only so much that you can do.
And there's also a feature, we didn't talk about it, but when the student clicks on something outside of Extempore, it says a thing pops up where the students go, oops. On video, it's pretty funny. That it says your instructor will be notified that you have navigated away, and then they go, sorry, I didn't, you know, and then they just keep going and don't touch anything else, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. So yeah, the navigation warnings are really helpful. And I always tell teachers too, like, you know, sometimes it can be unintentional, or they can accidentally click away. But when it says navigation warnings 8 times, it's like, okay, you know, what was this student doing while they were listening, right? So,
yes. And that, I mean, I think it all helps, because for us, sometimes it's very hard. If we're going to be accusing them or not giving credit or something like that, it's nice to have as much evidence as we can. So sometimes if it's so clear that it's like, I heard you click, the thing told me you clicked away, and I saw you read something else. I have all the evidence I need to know that, you know, you went somewhere else. And so, yeah, all of that helps. But again, I understand, I completely, and that was really my motivation for saying, okay, let's start using Extempore, because the problem we had with the recorded rehearsed answers was rampant. And then at that point I was like, I'm not helping them develop fluency. I'm not, like, what am I doing with this? And so for us, it has been really, really good for the cheating aspect of it, but also pedagogically, I think that there's a lot of value in that. The one thing that I would say, and yeah, the whole, I don't expect perfection, but it's so hard for them to move away from trying to give you perfect, or being scared that they're not going to get points because they're not saying it perfectly. And if I could show you the reaction of students who the first assignment or two, they're so scared and they're trying to conjugate every verb correctly, and oh my God, I said that wrong, I don't know the word. And once they get like, I still got a perfect score for that, oh, let's do this. And then they're like, okay, so now I'm just going to tell you because it's okay, right? You understand me, then you're going to give me credit. Once they like believe you that is actually true, that you're not expecting perfection, it's almost liberating for the students, and then they go for it. The one thing that I'll share with everybody, if I can, I know we're running out of time, but the one tip I'll definitely recommend, especially if your students are not used to Extempore, if your students are new to Extempore, is to do a mock assignment with similar question types in the same settings that you plan to use for future assignments, but that is only credit, no credit for completing it. You're not actually assessing any of their language skills or anything like that. It's just for them to try it. For some students, it is a bit shocking at first that they barely got to see the question and the recording started. They're like, wait, it started. I don't think it's supposed to start. Like, I get all those kinds of recordings. And then that's when I can tell the student, yes, that's how it's going to work. So I want them to get used to that feeling that the recording is going to start as soon as you see or hear the question. And that's something that sometimes they just need to get used to it. And then they're good for the assignments for credit. Same with the ones when they navigate away, right? All of those, it's just to get used to the platform itself. I would highly, highly recommend doing one assignment that is just credit, no credit, to try it out. And that will save you a lot of issues with the for credit assignments where you may now want the students to see the question again. Okay, do we have
hit 11 o'clock, but
more messages? I see a lot of messages, but I'm
all
trying to keep up.
all sorts of messages coming in and
Yes.
out. Other questions that we have for either myself or Florencia about today's presentation, about interpretive assessments, comprehension-based assessments, excuse me, or extempore in general. A few more. Oh, Lictal, yes. Less commonly taught languages. Yes, thank you, Alejandro. Thank you, Flor. And of course, a huge round of applause for extempore. I know she might not hear all of you, but she has been fantastic today. Thank you, Florencia.
Thank you.
Partnering with us. Sonia, Michael, Joseph, thank you. This is a wonderful webinar. Florencia, thank you again. This will be uploaded to YouTube very, very, very shortly where you can find it. Like and subscribe, by the way. And we will see you around. Anything else to add, Florencia?
Nothing else. Thank you so much for coming here, for being here on a Saturday morning. Thank you all for the nice messages I'm seeing, even with emojis and all. I'm loving that. So thank you all, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, guys. Take care.